But first, let me start with a fact, and it's arguably the biggest financial fact in Canada. You know that the federal government needs to borrow, this is a huge number, $3.27 trillion between now and 2030. I mean, come on, that's a number so big that it's incomprehensible. And by the way, it's such a big number because we don't pay off our debt. So when past borrowing matures, we have to refinance it. That part alone adds up to more than $2.8 trillion has to be refinanced over the next 5 years. Well, then we have to add on the borrowing to finance the new deficit, which amounts to another 270 billion to be borrowed between now and April 1st, 2030. You're going to hear a lot more about this debt in the next 5 years. And it's interesting, though, because attitudes about government debt and deficits, I think, is one of the biggest political divides in the country. On the one hand, you have the Liberals and NDP continuing to show no sign of concern about the buildup in debt and deficits and the increasing interest payments, versus Conservatives who worry about the increasing amount of tax dollars going to pay interest just on that existing debt. And by the way, that's up 300% in terms of the share of government spending in the last 5 years, along with the financial burden we're passing along to younger generations. Again, obviously not a concern for some. But the key takeaway, and this is, I think, hard for a lot of people to understand, the key takeaway is that it doesn't matter your party allegiance. Canada's still got to borrow $3.27 trillion in the next 5 years. And the second point to get is that the only realistic way to come up with that money is through borrowing in the credit markets by issuing bonds. Which brings me to Prime Minister Carney's talk of dividing spending in the budget. The federal budget will be in two categories, one for operations and the other for investments. Now, he didn't provide any details or clear definition of what an investment is, at least one that governments won't be tempted to manipulate for political reasons. I mean, balancing the operations side of the budget, by the way, is going to be easy as calling some expenditures investments. How about this? 1.4 billion given to the CBC, which the federal Liberals have called consistently, in quotes, an investment in culture, journalism, and regional connectivity. They called ArriveCan, in quotes, an investment in public safety and digital innovation. And under Prime Minister Carney's scheme, presto, the 60 million spent could be moved from operations to the investment side of the budget. They called the infamous financial and ethical disaster Sustainable Technology Development Canada, in quotes, an investment in environmental sustainability and green jobs. They called the GST holiday, which finance minister at the time, Chrystia Freeland, admitted was an unaffordable political gimmick, but they called it an investment in affordability. I think you get the idea. Just about anything the government spends money on can, and what's worrisome, probably will be called an investment. Presto. Balanced operating budget? Well, the federal government debt actually grows. But these aren't investments. They earn no return, while the interest on the borrowing continues to compound. You know, unfortunately, I got to admit that I don't have confidence for the majority of the political commentary to appreciate in the real world the institutions and people we need to lend us money couldn't care less about some artificial distinction Prime Minister Carney proposes to make. Instead, what they look at is things like, or metrics like debt to GDP, deficits to GDP, debt servicing capacity, economic growth, and other measures. They couldn't care less whether the government is borrowing funds for operations or capital investment. In short, it's an irrelevant bit of political theater I think we're going to be treated to when it comes to borrowing $3.27 trillion over the next 5 years. You know what? Prime Minister Carney knows this, by the way, but he hopes you don't. I love the way George Mason University economist got to the heart of this problem when he states, government should stop calling all spending investment. Real investment earns a return. If it did, the private sector would already be doing it. If it doesn't, it's just spending. Call it what it is.